So the 18 current AFL presidents are going to vote on the future of Tasmanian football. This is an unbelievably big, important vote for the future of Tasmanian football. These powerful men are going to decide whether or not Tasmania are finally going to have representation in the AFL, or whether they are going to remain as a second-class state that at best can only get games from Hawthorn and North Melbourne that are their smallest drawing games, pretty much their junk games. And for that, the taxpayer is going to have to pay a big, big price, as they have been doing for the last 20 years. Now, the AFL want you to think that they've got no say in this. It's not up to them, it's up to the presidents. So if the Tasmanian vote doesn't succeed, McLaughlin can say, not my fault, sorry Tasmanians, I had nothing to do with it. By the same token, if the Tasmanian bid wins and it's a disaster, the AFL and the power brokers of the AFL can say, not our decision, that was the AFL presidents. I'm going to show you a video which really does bring that into some dispute. The AFL have more say in this decision than what you will think. This is coming from what happened in 1986, when the presidents of the then VFL voted on whether or not to let the West Coast Eagles into the AFL. Let's have a look at what happened. This will shock you, but what happened in 1986 for the West Coast Eagles, this could happen again for the Tasmanian Football Club. Let's have a look.
October 1, 1986, one of the most significant dates in football history. The VFL Commission is meeting with its clubs to vote on the expansion of the league to 14 teams, with licences to be offered to Western Australia and Queensland if the vote is carried. On the same agenda is Fitzroy's fight for survival, and the two are about to become inextricably linked.
Halfway through the meeting, it looked as though the Conservative forces were going to carry the day and prevent this new national competition from starting up. So Graham Samuel, who was one of the shrewdest commissioners of the VFL back then, called an adjournment. They got Leon Weigard, the chairman of Fitzroy, in a side room.
He was told that he was going to get $666,000, which would probably keep the Fitzroy Football Club alive if his vote was positive. And the board meeting was reconvened, and Leon voted in favour, and the vote was 175, and that's how the national competition came into play.
Straight away, the Conservatives in that room exploded, accusing the VFL of having bought the vote of Fitzroy. And in a way, they probably had, but there was really no choice for Fitzroy but to go down that path.
The VFL/AFL had no say in whether or not the West Coast Eagles joined the competition. It was up to the presidents. Give me a break. The AFL was running that show. The presidents were used as a way of deflection. The AFL wants the public to think that it's the presidents that decide which clubs come in and which clubs don't. That way, the people that are going to be angry at the club being allowed in or not being allowed in will then be angry at the presidents, not the AFL. Very clever, but completely and utterly dishonest. How proud was Ross Oakley of how they did it? He couldn't have been any prouder of himself. The AFL wanted the West Coast Eagles to come in, so they paid Fitzroy $666,000. Now, that does not sound like a lot of money when you think about how much money the television rights are worth today. But keep in mind, in 1986, the VFL/AFL TV rights were only worth $1.5 million. So they were only getting $1.5 million a year for the TV rights. And they handed Fitzroy $666,000 to change their vote. Make no mistake, if it had meant bribing every single VFL president, that's what they would have done. As it turned out, they only needed to do it to one president, but they would have done every single president if they needed to do it. And again, that is proof that the presidents can be bought and they will change their vote if it suits their club. The next example we're going to look at where the presidents did not make the best decision for the game, they made the best decision for their own individual clubs. 1996. The Fitzroy Football Club want to merge with the North Melbourne Football Club. The North Melbourne Football Club want to merge with Fitzroy. These two clubs are within about 20 minutes of each other. There's only one problem. Fitzroy has agreed, and North Melbourne has agreed, but they need to get it past the AFL presidents. Now, if the AFL presidents were thinking, what's the best thing for the Fitzroy Football Club? What's the best thing for the North Melbourne Football Club? They would have accepted the merger. But there was a problem. North Melbourne in 1996 was the best team in the AFL. And the presidents had a concern that if they allowed Fitzroy to merge with North Melbourne, they would become too strong on the field. So what did the presidents do? Did they vote for the best in the best interest of the Fitzroy supporters, who, if this merger was allowed to go through, would still be able to see their team all the time, still be able to watch them train in Melbourne? No, they rejected the merger, and they instead merged the Brisbane Bears with the Fitzroy Lions. And the Fitzroy Lions were sent a 20-hour drive away from Melbourne. They were forced to relocate, or not relocate, they were forced to go to Brisbane and be taken over. Fitzroy only got 8 players the next year. Fitzroy was completely and utterly annihilated. That's another example of the presidents not doing what was best for the game, but instead doing what was the best for their own individual interests. And then, of course, came the Gold Coast Suns and the GWS Giants decisions. The AFL would like to have you think, not our decision, the presidents voted on it. And that's understandable why they want you to think that. Because let's be honest, the GWS Giants and the Gold Coast Suns have been an absolute disaster. They have never made a profit. They don't even look like making a profit. Now, the GWS Giants, they have been quite successful on the field. In the early days of the club, they used to use their lack of on-field success as a reason for the terrible crowds. And they said that once the crowds improved, so once the on-field performance improved, so too were the crowds. But that hasn't happened. In the last 6 years, the Giants have made the 8 5 times in the last 6 years. And the crowds are still awful. Absolutely awful. Let's have a look at this. In the history of the GWS Giants, their highest ever average home crowd for a season has been only 13,196. I'll say that again. Only 13,196 in a decade. That's the best they've been able to manage. And that is during a time when they've made a grand final and they've been in the final 8 6 times. The Gold Coast Suns, surprisingly, have had a higher attendance record. Now, their highest ever attendance average home crowd was 19,169. And that was in their first season. Now, this is interesting because the AFL was saying at the time that the Gold Coast Suns are going to slowly build and their crowds will slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The reverse of that has happened. Their crowd started off quite well with an average crowd of 19,169, and they've just gone into decline. The last year before COVID, their average home crowd was 11,417. So they've gone from 19 to 11. The exact opposite of what the AFL told you was going to happen. But the AFL can now throw their hands in the air and say, don't blame us, blame the presidents. The presidents decided to allow the Gold Coast Suns and the GWS Giants to enter the AFL. But this leaves me very, very concerned, and I don't think the Tasmanian Football Club are going to win this vote, because the AFL presidents are going to look at it and say, how will this benefit us? And if it doesn't benefit them, they're going to vote against it. Going on the history of how the presidents have voted in the past, they're not going to do what's best for Tasmanian football. They're going to do what's best for their own individual AFL clubs. And now, let's have a look at some of the clubs here. You've got Hawthorn. They don't want Tasmania to get allowed into the AFL because they want to keep getting money off the Tasmanian taxpayer for playing games there. The North Melbourne Football Club are the same. They want to keep playing games in Tasmania and having the taxpayer pay for that. And then you've got the other teams. You're going to have teams that are down on the ladder. If you allow the Tasmanian team to come in, they might get some of our draft picks. We don't want that. They saw that with the Suns and the Giants. The teams that finished at the bottom of the ladder didn't get the top draft picks anymore because all those draft picks were going to the Giants and the Suns. And this meant that these clubs stayed down for longer. This policy of having presidents vote on whether or not Tasmania can get a team is wrong. I don't know how anyone can think it's a good idea if the presidents had a history of voting for what was the best thing for the game, then that would be okay. But they don't. There's example after example after example of presidents voting in their own interests and not in what is best for the AFL and the game as a whole. Now, in the link below, I've left a link to that bit of footage where you can see the whole show. It's the story of the West Coast Eagles and how they were formed. It debunks many of the myths too about it's going to take 5 years to set the team up. The West Coast Eagles were set up in 160 days. The Adelaide Crows were set up in a very similar amount of time. I think it was about 4.5 months. It doesn't take 5 years to set up a new AFL team. The fact that they're saying it'll take 5 years shows that they're not keen on a Tasmanian team and they're looking for reasons to not allow them in. They're going to use things like stadiums. They're going to say that the stadiums in Tasmania are not up to AFL standard. Therefore, they need 4 years to build a new one. But right now, actually today, there's an AFL final being played in Launceston. If the Tasmanian ground in Launceston is good enough to host an AFL final, why on earth would it not be good enough to host Tasmanian games? It makes no sense.
And saying that people have failed.